Welcome to Talks with Tot. I'm your host, Tot. Welcome back to Talks with Tot. I'm your host, Tot, and this is episode 5. We're going to be talking about astrology. What is astrology? I think when a lot of people you ask or you start, I start talking about astrology, people immediately go back to kind of the 1980s, 90s, sitcoms, people talking about dating, hey baby, what's your sign, right? They're basically talking about what your sun sign is, and that is the day and the month of when you were born. So astrology is a bunch of signs. They have 12 of them. They start off they kind of split the month, right? So the first sign of 12 is Aries, and Aries begins in the middle of March and goes to the middle of April. And then it, goes from there, from Aries to Taurus, April to May, and then Gemini, May to June, and then Cancer, June to July. July to August is Leo. August to September is Virgo. September to October is Libra. October to November is Scorpio. November to December is Sagittarius. December to January is Capricorn. January to February is Aquarius. And then February to March is Pisces. So my birthday is March the 6th, and that makes me a Pisces. And that means I'm a Pisces sun. There's also other planets like up in the sky, same thing, right? So all of these signs can be constellations. So there's the Pisces constellation, the Aries constellation. But with the planets, there's also the moon, right? So if you have your sun sign, you have your moon sign, and then you have your rising sign. So I'm going to talk about a lot of little topics and subjects with nomenclature that you may go, oh, I'm not too familiar with that. And that's okay. Just know that I'm going to kind of put things out there. And if we need to go back or maybe write them down and Google them if you're so inclined. But basically, I just want to inform everyone that it's not just, hey, I'm a Pisces, right? Because people will really get interested in astrological signs when it comes to love and dating, right? People will say, well, hey, I just met this really great person and they're a Scorpio and I'm an Aries. Are we a good match? And what I always tell everyone is there's someone for everyone out there, and you can find a person for everyone. So it doesn't matter when your birthday is. One of the sayings that I like to remind myself of, and that I'm reminded of with astrology, is everything is exactly the way that it's supposed to be, right? Every decision that you make, because a lot of times people will try to predict the future based off of the past or based off of information, right? And when you get into predictions, that's where things start to get a little sideways and people start to get a little, wow, is this tinfoil hat type conversation, or is this really science, right? How can it be science? And what I want to tell you guys is it is science. And the reason that it's science is because it's based off of the planets. So if you pull out your telescope and you look into the sky, you can see these things, right? I wouldn't recommend looking into your telescope at the sun, right? That'll burn your eyeballs. That's bad. But when you're born, you have the date, right? So I'm born on March 6th. You have the time. I was born, roughly before 6 o'clock in the morning, and that will help depict your rising sign. And then you've got the placement. So what you can do is, if you're interested, there's a lot of information on the internet, and you can get your birth chart. So in order to get your birth chart, you need your birth date, the month, the date, the year, the time, and then the place. So if you were born in, let's say, Los Angeles, California, or Sacramento, they would be able to hone it down to if you were born in, let's say, Folsom, Elk Grove, Citrus Heights, Panorama City, Riverside, Glendale, what is the township of where you were born? Get that precise. And then sometimes when you're even looking at your astrological chart for current day, it can depend on where you're located, right? Because if you're in, let's say, Antarctica, or more reasonably, Australia, right? The time you're going to be, maybe a whole day ahead, half a day ahead, and then just your geological location, the planets are going to be in different locations. So that's why we have summer is different than, winter in Australia. They're opposites. So that was a lot of information all kind of thrown at you. Basically, you need to know, right? There's 12 signs. And where does your sun sign of your birth date, where does that fall in? And that'll give you a lot of information about a person, which is how you can, back in the day when we used to read newspapers, excuse me, you could open up the newspaper and read your astrological sign for the day, right? So if I'm a Pisces, I would read Pisces. However, what I've learned over the years is your sun sign doesn't always track necessarily, let's say, your personality, right? So your personality is more coded by your rising sign, which is on your birth chart. It is the first house of where, it's kind of like a big pie, 360 degrees. And where that first pie lands, that's a house. So your sign is also considered a house. So I'm in the 12th house, Pisces is, but my rising sign is Aquarius. And so a lot of my personality is based off of the Aquarius, traits. Some other things that we need to go over before we get into some other topics is broken down with the astrological signs. They're broken into groups. So you have fire signs, you have water signs, you have fixed signs, and you have air signs. No, that's not correct. You have fire, water, earth, and air. And then of those, you have mutable and fixed. That's what it is. My apologies. So, and let me just put a caveat on this, right? I am self-taught. I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of podcasts. I watch a lot of YouTube. I practice. And then kind of as a side note, I have my own personal scientific experiment going on right now. I've never been so lucky. At my job site, remember I do construction for my day job, and I currently have 10 people on staff, myself included, in a job trailer. At one time we had 11, and of the 12 astrological houses, we had 11 of the 12 with no duplicates, just in our office. Okay, so we lost one, and now I'm down to 10, and I have 10 of the 12. And so, because I talk about it a lot at work, and I like to equate people, right? So if you know a Pisces, you know me, right? And you're like, well, Tatiana's a Pisces, and Tatiana is very creative, right? That's a trait of a Pisces. Pisces are very dreamy. They're a little spacey, which sometimes I can be, right? But if you know Pisces, you can kind of pick out some of those traits and you'd be like, oh, okay, I'm learning. Tatiana does these things because she has these traits that follow her because she's a Pisces. So in my office, I've got my Aquarius, my Taurus, my Leo, my Capricorn, my Cancer, my Libra, my Gemini, my Sagittarius, I am missing a Virgo and a Scorpio. So if we get anybody new on the team, I've told my bosses they need to be either a Virgo or a Scorpio. That's it. I can't accept anybody else. It's kind of a running joke that we have. And if you come to our office, people will usually nowadays my staff will start asking you before I even do it, what's your birthday, right? Fun and interesting fact, in Sacramento, everybody's a Gemini. Everybody. For some reason on the job site out with my structural engineer, my operations, my field personnel, you ask them when their birthday is and everyone's like, I'm a Gemini. I don't know what that means. I just find it interesting. And a lot of this at the end of the day, right? It doesn't mean anything. It can, but it doesn't have to, right? Because along the same lines of what I was talking about earlier is you're exactly where you need to be. And if you think about that and you really break it down, because sometimes we get the shoulds, right? And I'm going to get a little philosophical in this conversation because it warrants it. But when you get a case of the shoulds, right? I should be, more successful. I should be a parent. I should be in a relationship. I should be all these things. And if that's not the case, then in reality, you shouldn't. And so it gets that stress of, no, I should be. I always thought, I dreamt when I was a little girl that this was how life was going to go. And the fact that it isn't, right, means that it doesn't. And so that's the idea that every decision you make in life, there's times like I was talking about gaming the system where people are trying to, well, if I read my horoscope, maybe I can make better decisions for my life so that I make the money or I, get the boyfriend or something in their life happens because they can say, okay, I'm looking for something, right? And all of the astrologers will tell you that every decision you make is the decision that you're supposed to make, whether it feels right or wrong, right? And I personally find that to be extremely reassuring and, in a sense, relaxing. Because if you ever start to look at your life and you get kind of down and you're like, gosh, this is not how I thought my life was going to go. I mean, how many of you out there, you wake up every day and you're like, hey, don't get me wrong, I have a good life. But if you were to go back in time, right, like when I was 8 and I was in second grade and I was to write I don't want to call it an essay, but where I was going to be in the year 2000, and a lot of you have heard the story, right? When I was 8, it was 1989? And so the year 2000 was far, far away at 8 years old. And I said I was going to be a doctor and I was going to have a flying car. It's 2025. I'm not a doctor. And I have no flying car, right? But we'll get to that. That's part of that is the Pluto in Aquarius, which is where we are right now. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about astrology on this podcast was I was at a dinner recently. There was a jiu-jitsu competition that I didn't participate in, and my team went down. They came back, they were having dinner, and my coach called and said, hey, would you like to come and join us for dinner? And I said, yeah, I'd love to. So I drove down to the spot they were all having dinner, and by the time I got there, the table with all of my normal training friends, they had their families and it was kind of booked up. So I got sat at a table with some guys I knew, but not very well. And I didn't have a lot of conversation. And so this was my first time really conversing. And the topic of astrology came up, and one of the guys, Ryan, he was like, oh God, not astrology. And I asked him, I said, what do you know about astrology? And he was like, well, you read in the newspaper, kind of what I was describing earlier. And I said, yes. And people who read in the newspaper now online, right? When you're reading your astrological, birthday sun sign, and it doesn't resonate with you, right? People are like, oh, that's just, it's hogwash. Well, it can be, right? Or you could be, I haven't talked about cuspies yet. So when the signs change, and I don't have them, written down or anything, but it's like I said, it's kind of the middle of the month. So it's like the 20th. It's anywhere between the 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd. That's when the signs change. So you go from one sign like Aries goes to Taurus. So right now, today is April 26th. It's Saturday, and we are where the sun is in Taurus. And prior to this, right, if it's the 26th, a couple days ago, so you could be an Aries, and if the signs change, let's say they change on the 21st, 4/21, exactly at what time, right? And so you could have traits of being an Aries, or you could have traits of being more of a Taurus. And what's interesting, and I'll go back to the dinner conversation, but what's interesting is like my parents, both my mom and my dad are Libras. They're both born under the sign of Libra. My dad is at the end of September, which he's a cuspy for a Virgo/Libra, and he has a lot of Virgo tendencies. And then my mom is on the October end. So she's on the Libra Scorpio cusp, and she has a lot more Scorpio tendencies than Libra tendencies. And so if you just look at that label and you open up the newspaper and you look at it and you're like, this doesn't resonate with me. And every time you do it, then you're of course going to be like, yeah, this isn't fun. This doesn't work for me because I'm looking for some kind of answer or guidance or a fortune cookie type information. And if every time you look, it doesn't resonate, you're going to be like, I'm not going to look at this anymore, or I'm not going to put any validity to it. And so you have to learn about the cuspies, right? I think they just traditionally call them cusp, and I call them cuspies. So cuspies is not a technical name for them. That's a name I give them. So anyways, I'm at dinner with Ryan and Josh, and we're talking about this, and they're both engineers, which engineers are very black and white, right? Which leads us back to this is science. I mean, you can't negate the fact that you look up in the sky and there's planets, you see the moon, you see little twinkly stars, right? And that's what we're talking about. And so what I told Ryan was, hey, it doesn't just affect you individually, right? We can be affected by the masses as a whole. And what I mean by that is one of my favorite things that just happened not too long ago, towards the end of 2024, is Pluto moved. And it was currently in the sign of Capricorn, and then it changed signs where it moved. Like if you think of everything kind of like as a clock, and as the hands move, everything's moving. And when you think of the solar system, right, everyone always thinks of the planets and everything kind of orbiting circularly around it. Like when you were a little kid and you had that mobile above your baby bed, all the planets are out there. So Pluto spends anywhere, it's usually like 20 plus years in each sign. It's like 249 years for it to make a complete rotation around us. And what that does is, what it means is when Pluto just moved from Capricorn into Aquarius, stick with me, it's for the masses, right? What you do is you don't go, oh my God, Pluto in Aquarius, what am I going to do, right? Nope. What you do is you look back in history. And so you look back in the time, which it was like 1777. And what was going on in 1777, the last time that Pluto moved into Aquarius? Well, there was a lot of revolution going on, and it wasn't just in the United States. There was the French Revolution. There was, back in the day, they talk about there was the invention of gunpowder. There was the invention of paper, right? So what does that mean for us today? right? Aquarius is the sign of the water bearer. Does that mean it's a water sign? No, it's not. What it means, though, is the story of the water bearer is everyone used to go down and collect water at the river every day. And at one point, the water bearer says, hey, there's no sense in everybody going to get water. Why don't I take this big jug and I'll go down and fill up the water for everyone and I'll bring it back. And so what that means is Aquarius is for the people. It's about the people. And so here we are in, we just had the end of 2024. We're now in 2025, and it's about the people. And if you look at what's going on, I'm not going to get into politics, but if you do look at what's going on in the world, around the world, right, it's about the people. And so you can look at things, you can't necessarily predict things, but Aquarius and Pluto is also about technology, technological advancements in weaponry, right? So we're looking at potentially, we've got, a lot of talks on AI, robots, my flying car that I was talking about earlier. So there's a lot of things that are changing, and that's based on when the planets move signs. I listened to a really great podcast, and it was based on music and how it moved through Mercury. And I don't mean literally how music moved through Mercury, but how it was like every 3 years, the signs changed as it went through Mercury. And they were talking about the music and how every 3 years there was a change in the theme of the music. And when you look at it, it was super eye-opening of like, wow, like this is very interesting. I listen to a lot of different podcasts. If you're interested, I can share some of those with you. I've had a couple of readings. When I say a couple, I've had 2 or 3. I didn't have my first astrological reading. I didn't have a natal chart until I was working with some people back at LAX not too long ago. And one of my coworkers, Fernando, he was a little bit into the astrology, and he says, well, show me your birth chart. Let's compare. And I was like, birth chart? Here I had been the whole time just thinking I was a straight up Pisces. And that's when I got in and I had a reading with one of my favorite podcasters. His name's Scott Tajarian. And he told me about my North Node, which you're like, what's a North Node? It's not a planet. It's a placement. Mine happens to be in Leo, which funny enough means that in this life, my soul's purpose is to be the queen. This life is about me. And it was eye-opening to be, over 40 and learn what my soul's purpose was in this life. And they talk about, the karmic pathway. And basically what that means is if you ever go through life and you listen to your intuition, right? There's that kind of that gut check. There's that feeling, you're walking down the street and it's nighttime and you look and you're thinking, I could cut through that alley and get back to the parking lot, or I could stay on the well-lit, path of the sidewalk and be safe. And you look down the alleyway and you kind of get that feeling like, I shouldn't go down there. That's no good. That's intuition, right? And when you make decisions about stuff, like for example, me deciding to go to Sacramento and take this job, when I did it, it was like doors started opening up for me all over the place. And when that happens, you know that you are on the right path. I know that I talked about you're always in the right place of where you're supposed to be, but there's still the right path. And what I mean by that is there's decisions that you can make, and I know this gets a little messy, but stick with me. There's decisions that you can make and you can be on the right path of your soul's purpose. Or there's just decisions you make and you're on a path, and that's fine too, right? But when you actually are on the right path, it's almost like when you ask questions, like the universe provides answers for you. You know, like, how did I know that I was supposed to go to Sacramento, right? I got a big promotion. I found the greatest apartment, right? I found the best jiu-jitsu studio away from home. There was a bunch of other things, you know, just little things, you know. I'm trying to think of some examples. It was a while ago when all this took place, but I'm sure something will come up as I think about it. So when you're on your karmic path, it's like the universe provides you those answers. And so that has a lot to do with following what your north node is. And you can imagine, you know, I was told that mine is to live this life for me. And you're probably sitting at home thinking, well, yeah, Tatiana, like, your life is about you. And what's interesting is, you know, you're kind of growing up, you are kind of the sum of everything around you and what your parents and society and whatnot. And I was always told to go along and get along, right? It was like, don't make waves, don't call attention to yourself, don't, you know, go out of your way to do anything extraordinary, right? And it sounds small, but it you know what I'm saying, right? Like, don't pick fights with people for reasons you don't need to, right? The saying is go along to get along, right? And when you have been going about life like that for so long, to all of a sudden be given this path of, well, I get to do what I want to do, right? And it kind of makes me think of the little girl in the movie who, you know, it's like, what do you want to wear today? And, you know, she wants to wear her rain boots or her cowboy boots and, you know, some plaid shirt with polka dotted pants and a hat and all this mismatchy outfit, right? And, you know, when you really think about it and you get that question of, what is it that I want to do with my life, right? It's a little hard to answer that question, but little by little, if you understand and you keep that in the back of your mind. Anyways, I digress down a long path of more specifics about me, which astrology is a lot easier to understand, I think, when you're talking about, you know, a certain person like yourself or using someone to explain some things. And I know that's generalities, but there's a lot of terminology in the astrology. Astrology is considered a language. And when you're trying to read your chart and you're looking at how everything moves, there's these things called transits, and they happen, you know, hourly, daily. There's a lot of different ones. I don't understand them. I'm not going to pretend to understand them. There's a lot of things that I am very new to, but I'm very curious about. And so one of the areas that I find great information and great help with is I'm going to offer you guys AI, right? ChatGPT was a great one, still is. I currently use Grok. I'm a big fan of looking up Grok. You can type into Grok, hi, my birth date is, you know, March 6, 1981. I was born at, you know, 5:09 in the morning in Sonoma, California. And, you know, I'd like to know what my love life is going to look like for the next week. Or, you know, help me understand Mercury in retrograde, right? These are great tools to understand these things. And I do want to touch on Mercury in retrograde for a little bit, because that is one that happens about 4 times a year. And it's one of the bigger ones when people kind of go, oh, you know, Mercury's going into retrograde. I do it myself, right? And I shouldn't, because what's interesting is I started this podcast when Mercury was in retrograde. it was not in retrograde in my birth chart, but for some reason it has called me to start this. I don't know. It was just the timing was right and all systems pointed to go. So I went. But what is Mercury in retrograde? So the way that I describe it, and I kind of alluded to it on an earlier podcast, is if you've ever been on a train and you have two trains that are traveling in the same direction, but one's going slower than the other one, as you're passing, it starts to look like as you get by that train is then going backwards when it isn't. It's still going forwards. So the way I understand it is Mercury, it rotates in an oval, kind of like an egg shape, not a circle. And so what happens is as it starts to make that turn like on a track, like a race track, it starts to feel like it's slowing down as it comes around. And it lasts like that for about 4 weeks there's typically a shadow period leading up to it and a shadow period leaving it on the end. And what that feels like when Mercury goes into retrograde is you can get a flat tire, right? You can have car trouble. You can have flight delays. You can have technological malfunctions. My computer always malfunctions. My cell phone will kind of glitch or slow down or need to be rebooted multiple times. So there's I call them hiccups, just little things that kind of happen. And I just remind myself, hey, Mercury's in retrograde. This is going to pass. Don't panic. Don't get all excited. Leave yourself more time when you're traveling, right? Know that you're going to need more time to get wherever it is you're going because there could be, I'm not saying there will be, there could be some minor delays. Just those kinds of things that you can look at. And that's just, a little, like a piece of grain of a sand on a beach of how much information there is for astrology. So I think that's just what I wanted to touch on with you guys, is give you, a little taste of it and kind of open your mind that it's more than just, one particular sign. And it's interesting to see how signs interact. Like I talked about my personal science experiment. That's been very entertaining. And it's also, I think, been educational for people around me because, specifically I was talking with my project manager and we were working. He's an Aquarius. I'm a Pisces, right? And he and I get along great. I think it's because I have Aquarius rising. And one of our coworkers is a Gemini. And we were actually doing some landscaping. We were pulling these bushes out in order to get prepared for our trailers to go in. And this coworker was behaving in a way, and both my project manager and I kind of noticed it. And I said, hey, does he remind you of anybody that we know? And he said, yeah, he reminds me of, so-and-so. And I said, so-and-so is also a Gemini. And he says, that's interesting. He says, so's my dad. And he says, my dad reminds me of this. And so you can start to see the patterns and you can start to see people who are a certain sign, right? One of the things I always kind of equate to is, as a water sign myself, right, as a Pisces, most of my bestest friends, people that I have very good friendships and very good communication with, are Cancers. So typically when I meet someone who's a Cancer birthday, I'll say, that's a new best friend right there. Cancers, Scorpios are also water signs. There's a lot of information there of how those three kind of work together. One more thing that I wanted to talk about was I talked about the sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign that define kind of, your being, your moods, and then your personality. And that's called the trifecta. So that's your sun sign, your birthday, your moon sign, wherever your moon falls, which house it falls into under the sign. So my moon is a Pisces. And there's also the rising sign, which is the first house of your astrological, it's where I think it's the midheaven starts, or the MC, whatever that midline is on your chart, which is usually where the first house is. So I'm no expert, but I do have a lot of interest in this. So, if you have any questions, I've had recently an inspector. I don't know if you're watching, but he joined our team for a minute, and then he has kind of moved on to something else. But he was curious about all this astrology stuff, and he downloaded an app on his phone, and he was telling me, he says, I have learned so much about myself and why I behave the way I do, why I react the way that I do in certain situations. And so it creates a very calming effect for people, right? It's sometimes looking for answers. It's kind of like that, I was talking about the fortune cookie thing, right? When you're looking for, why is the world behaving the way it does, or why are things the way that they seem, right? It's because of astrology, or it can be because of astrology. And I'm not going to hang my hat and say everything is, but there's definitely, you can look back and trace things together and go, oh wow, I didn't realize that Venus was moving through, and that's why the color of the year was pink and the Barbie movie came out. And when you look back and you really become aware of things, it's like, whoa, it's mind boggling. So with that, I've talked a lot, probably confused you, but I'm hoping I gave you a little bit of a taste there. And I'm not sure what episode 6 is going to be about, so it'll be a wild card. So tune in next week. Thank you for listening to Talks with Tot. I'll see you guys next time.